I've always been the kind of person who shows up. That's just who I am. When my cousin got married in Halifax, I drove 11 hours through a February snowstorm to be there. When my uncle had his hip replaced, I took 2 days off work to sit with him in the waiting room at St. Michael's. I'm not saying that to make myself sound like a saint. I'm saying it because it matters for what happened next. The diagnosis came on a Tuesday in October. My doctor at Mount Sinai called it a uterine fibroid, large enough that it was pressing on my bladder, causing pain that I'd been ignoring for almost 8 months because I thought it was just stress. She said surgery was the right move, and sooner was better than later. She had one available slot, the 3rd week of January. I remember sitting in the parking garage afterward, still in my coat, not turning the car on. January. That was the same week my parents had booked their trip to Banff. They'd been planning it for over a year. My mother had talked about it constantly. The hot springs, the gondola, the ski lessons she'd signed my brother up for, even though he hadn't skied since he was 12. My father had researched every restaurant within driving distance of the Fairmont. My brother, he's 31, 3 years younger than me, had already bought new gear. The whole trip had been booked around his schedule, actually, because he's a paramedic and his shifts make planning difficult. They'd built the entire vacation around making sure he could go. I called my mother that same evening. I told her about the fibroid. I told her what the doctor said. I told her about January. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and then she said, "Can't you ask about a different date?" I explained that this was the slot my surgeon had available, that she was booked months out otherwise, and that waiting longer wasn't medically recommended. Another pause. Then, "I just don't know what we're supposed to do about the flights. We already paid for everything." That was the moment. Right there, I felt something shift in my chest, not anger yet, just a quiet, cold recognition. Like when you're driving, and you realize you've been going the wrong way for 20 minutes, and you know you have to turn around, but you just sit with it for a second first. I told her it was okay. I told her I'd figure it out. And then I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time, listening to the heat click on and off. My aunt, my father's older sister, had called me the next morning. She'd heard through my father, apparently. She didn't ask me how I was feeling about the surgery. The first thing she said was, "Your aunt is going to be there, you understand me? I don't care what else is going on, I'll be there." Her name is Janet. She's 64, retired from nursing, and she drives a 15-year-old Subaru that she refuses to replace because, as she puts it, it still works. She'd moved back to Toronto from Thunder Bay 2 years earlier to be closer to family after my uncle passed. She lives about 40 minutes from me in Scarborough, in the same house she grew up in. I told her she didn't have to do that. She told me to stop being ridiculous. Over the following weeks, I watched my family talk about Banff more than they talked about my surgery. My brother texted our family group chat a screenshot of the Fairmont room. My mother sent links to restaurants. My father replied with a photo of a trail map. I got a separate text from my mother, just for me, saying she hoped I'd feel better soon and that she'd bring me back something nice from the gift shop. I didn't respond to that one for 2 days. The surgery itself was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. Aunt Janet picked me up at 5:30 in the morning, and she brought a thermos of tea even though she knows I'm not supposed to eat or drink anything before general anesthetic. "It's for me," she said. "I've been up since 4, I'm 64, I need tea." I laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed in about 2 weeks. We drove to Mount Sinai in the dark, through streets that were still quiet, snow coming down lightly. She parked in the hospital garage and walked me all the way to the pre-op unit and sat with me while nurses came and went, while someone put an IV in my hand, while a resident explained the procedure one more time in that rehearsed, gentle way that doctors do when they know you're scared. Aunt Janet sat in the plastic chair beside my bed and read a paperback novel she'd brought in her tote bag, and occasionally looked up and said something completely normal. About a documentary she'd been watching. About the hospital's terrible coffee. About a neighbor who'd been shoveling snow at 6 in the morning for no discernible reason. She was making it ordinary. I realized that later. She was treating it like the most normal thing in the world so that I wouldn't spiral. She'd been a nurse for 35 years. She knew exactly what she was doing. Just before they wheeled me in, she put her hand over mine and said, "I'll be right here, I'm not going anywhere." My mother texted at 8:47 a.m. It said, "On the gondola, the view is incredible and thinking of you today, hope it goes smoothly." She'd attached a photo of herself and my brother against a mountain backdrop, both of them grinning. I turned my phone face down. The surgery took about 2 hours. When I woke up in recovery, Aunt Janet was the first face I saw. She'd negotiated her way in somehow. I still don't fully know how. And she was sitting there with her novel in her lap, reading glasses on, perfectly calm, like she'd been waiting for 20 minutes instead of however long it had actually been. "There you are," she said, when she saw my eyes open. "Just that. There you are." Like I'd only stepped out of the room for a moment, I cried. I'm not embarrassed about it. I was coming out of anesthesia and I was sore and relieved, and something about seeing her face made everything I'd been holding back for weeks just come out at once. She handed me a tissue from her purse without saying a word. Recovery was hard in the ways that surgery recovery always is, and hard in other ways I hadn't fully anticipated. I live alone. I've been on my own since I was 24, in a one-bedroom apartment near Dufferin. Aunt Janet stayed with me for the first 4 days. She slept on my pull-out couch and made soup from scratch, and drove me to my post-op appointment, and picked up my prescriptions from the shoppers on Bloor without being asked. She made a list on her phone of every instruction the surgeon gave, and asked questions at every appointment that I was too tired and foggy to think of myself. My family arrived back from Banff on the Friday of that week. I know this because my brother posted about it. Pictures of the drive home, a video of the mountains through the car window, a caption that said "best trip ever." There were 40-something likes on it. I was one of them, because I'd clicked it by accident while scrolling, half-medicated, on my couch. My mother called that evening. She talked for about 12 minutes about the trip, the food, the skiing, the hot springs, how the hotel had a fireplace in the lobby. Then she said, "So how are you feeling?" And when I said I was managing but it had been a hard week, she said, "Well, these things take time," and then pivoted to asking whether I'd seen a news story about something that had nothing to do with anything. My father texted once to say he was glad it went okay. My brother didn't reach out at all. Over the following 3 weeks, Aunt Janet came by every few days. She brought groceries. She sat with me. She watched British baking shows with me, because she'd gotten into them since retiring, and I'd never seen them, and she felt this was an oversight that needed to be corrected. On the harder days, when the recovery pain was worse than expected, and I was getting frustrated with my own body, she would just listen. She didn't offer solutions. She didn't try to fix it. She just stayed on the phone, or sat on the couch beside me and let me say what I needed to say. During one of those visits, I made an offhand comment. I don't even remember exactly what I said. Something like, "I just feel like I don't exist to them unless it's convenient." And she got very quiet in a way that she doesn't usually get quiet. She was looking at her hands. And she said, "I've been watching this family for a long time, sweetheart. I've been watching for a long time." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. My parents' anniversary is in April. They'd been married for 35 years, and my mother had wanted a dinner, not a big party, just family at a restaurant downtown. They'd booked a private room at a place in Liberty Village that my brother had recommended, one of those renovated industrial spaces, with exposed brick and low lighting and a tasting menu. The kind of place that costs more than you think it will, and where everyone always says we should do this more often before going back to their lives. I was invited, obviously. I'd been debating whether to go. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't still carrying something from January. But I went, because I always go, because that's the kind of person I am, and because some part of me still hoped that maybe things would be different. There were about 15 people in the room, my parents, my brother and his girlfriend, a few family friends, a couple of cousins, some of my parents' neighbors, and Aunt Janet. The dinner went fine. The food was good. My mother was happy, which made the atmosphere light. My father made a toast that was awkward in the way that his toasts always are. He's not a words person, but heartfelt. My brother gave a speech that made everyone laugh. I sat and smiled and participated and felt, somewhere underneath it all, like I was watching the evening through glass. After the dessert plates were cleared, Aunt Janet stood up. She's not a big person. She's barely 5'2", but when she stands up in a room you notice. Maybe it's the nurse's posture. Maybe it's just something about her. She tapped her glass lightly with her knife, and the room went quiet. She said she wanted to say a few words about family. People smiled and settled in. My mother looked touched. She started normally enough. She talked about how long she'd known my parents, about the early years, about what she admired about them. And then she shifted. Gently, but unmistakably. She said she'd spent the last several months thinking about what it means to actually show up for someone. Not in the easy moments, she said, but in the ones that cost you something. She looked at me briefly, just for a second. Then she reached into the small handbag she'd had hanging on her chair and took out her phone. She said she hoped no one would mind, but she'd written some things down because she wanted to get them right. And then she started reading. She read my mother's text from the morning of my surgery. The one with the gondola photo. She didn't editorialize. She just read it, clearly and calmly, the way a nurse reads a chart. Then she read my father's single follow-up text. Then she talked about the night she'd called me after my diagnosis, and what I told her about my mother's first response, the flights, the cost, whether I could ask about a different date. The room had gone very still. My mother said quietly, "Just her name, a warning." Aunt Janet looked at her calmly and said, "I'm almost done." She talked about what recovery looks like after an abdominal surgery. She talked about what it means to be alone, in an apartment, trying to manage pain, and medication, and follow-up appointments. And the emotional weight of having had something removed from your body. She talked about the 4 days she'd spent on my pull-out couch, and the appointments she'd attended, and the questions she'd asked on my behalf, because I was too exhausted to remember them. And then she put the phone down. She looked around the room slowly, at my parents, at my brother, at the family, friends and cousins, who were very carefully not looking at anyone. She said, 35 years is a long time to be married. It's a long time to be a family. I think it's worth asking, on a night like this, what kind of family you want to be for the next 35. Because the answer isn't in a speech. It's in what you do when someone you love needs you and it costs you something. She sat down. For a moment no one spoke. My brother was the first one to react. He said something low, almost under his breath, about it not being appropriate. His girlfriend stared at the table. My father's expression was the one he gets when he doesn't know what to say, very still, very closed. My mother's eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and I couldn't tell if she was sad or angry or both. One of the family friends, a woman my parents had known since before I was born, reached over and put her hand on my arm. She didn't say anything, she just left her hand there. My cousin, who'd come from Mississauga and barely knew the full story, said quietly, "I didn't know any of that happened." She was looking at me when she said it. My father spoke eventually. He looked at Aunt Janet and said that she'd overstepped. She nodded, like she'd expected that, and said, "Maybe. But I'm not sorry." The dinner ended not long after that, as dinners tend to do when someone has said the true thing that was sitting in the middle of the table the whole time. I walked to my car alone. The night was cold in the way that April nights in Toronto still sometimes are. That sharp leftover winter cold that comes in off the lake, and I stood beside my car for a minute before getting in. Aunt Janet came out a few minutes later and stood beside me. "You okay?" she said. "I thought about it." "I don't know yet," I said. "But I think I will be." She nodded. "That's the right answer." She told me something then that I've thought about a lot since. She said that she hadn't done it to hurt my parents. She'd done it because she'd watched me shrink around this family for years, always adjusting, always making room, always making it okay. And she said she wasn't going to keep pretending that was just how things were. In the weeks that followed, my mother and I had a conversation that was long overdue. It was uncomfortable, and it didn't resolve everything, and it will probably take a long time to fully resolve, if it ever does. My father has said very little, which is typical. My brother and I haven't really spoken. But something changed. I'm not sure how to explain it, except to say that once a thing has been said out loud, once it's in the air in the room, in front of people, it can't be unsaid. The story my family had told about itself for years, the one where we were close and present and there for each other, had a different version. And everyone in that room now knew it. Aunt Janet and I have dinner together every couple of weeks now, usually at her house in Scarborough. She makes too much food, always, and sends me home with containers of whatever she's cooked, and we watch television and argue mildly about whether the contestants on the baking show deserve their scores. And it is, I think, one of the most genuinely good things in my life. I used to think that family was just the people you're born into. I thought loyalty meant staying, no matter what. I thought love was something that existed automatically, just by virtue of blood. I know better now. Love is the person who drives across the city at 5:30 in the morning and brings tea she can't even share. It's the one who sleeps on your pull-out couch for 4 days, without being asked, and makes notes on her phone, so she doesn't forget your surgeon's instructions. It's the one who stands up at a dinner table and says the thing that everyone else decided, quietly and collectively, they were never going to say. I'm still figuring out what my family looks like going forward, but I know who's in it, and I think that's the part that matters.